Got it. Okay. So Adam, before I get started, I'm going to do a quick little introduction. I want to introduce fellow environmental partners who's kind of hosting this. And I'll do it quickly because this is a series of 3 interviews and I don't spend a lot of time in each of the interviews. But Fellow is a company that Brooke and I started. Brooke is recording right now, but and my name is Staci Taruscio for those people that don't know me. But we come from an operator background. We've transitioned out of that E&P space and into this nonprofit space with fellow environmental partners intent on addressing orphan wells. You know this, but for the larger audience, orphan wells are those wells that oil and gas wells that don't have an operator and therefore become the responsibility of the state. Most of the time they're not producing. Big topic of conversation right now because we've all heard a lot about the infrastructure bill and various and sundry other things. So Fellow's mission is really to reclaim some of those wells, yes, but even before that, do a lot of research on what kind of impacts those wells are having socially, environmentally, and see if we can't understand and help to build strategy that's very founded in data and science around the best way to address those. So that's what we hope to contribute. And then there's an education pillar to our mission as well. And that's really transparently communicating what we learn back out to the public. That's a big part of what we're doing here today, hoping to level set folks on some basics about the infrastructure bill, about what it means to plug and abandon a well. That'll be actually the first interview that'll be published. This will be the second. And then the third will be kind of the carbon offset market and how is that going to incentivize operators one way or the other. So with us is Adam Peltz. Adam, I'll let you introduce yourself or add to what I say here in just a second. But best I can tell, you've been very influential, very instrumental in getting the infrastructure bill not only constructed, but also across the finish line and now working through the execution phase of that with the states back and forth and on the federal side as well. So Adam works at the Environmental Defense Fund. Do you want to add anything to that, Adam?
Sure. Thank you, Staci. I'm glad we're having this very timely conversation. So yes, I'm a senior attorney at the Environmental Defense Fund. I've been with EDF for around 10 years, working on local environmental impacts from oil and gas development. And I've been focusing on the orphan well issue for the past several years and very intensively since the pandemic began. And as Staci said, I worked very closely with stakeholders and lawmakers to bring into being this $4.7 billion funding opportunity to plug and remediate orphan wells across the country.
Perfect. And I think one very important thing to say is our intent at Fellow is to bring people together to have solution-oriented conversations. That's a hard thing sometimes to go out and talk to somebody that would seemingly be on the opposing side of the table as you. But what we found in our conversations are folks like Adam being very, very open to having these conversations and doing their part to both educate and give perspective. And we really appreciate that of Adam and all the other folks we're here to interview. So for those of you that see this and have questions, want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is www.fellowenviro.org. So I will jump into some of the questions that we've prepared for Adam. We have 5 for you, Adam. So the first one is, can you just give a general overview of the infrastructure bill, how it addresses orphan wells, and maybe a little more specifics on how much money is going to go to each state and where that number is coming from?
Sure. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a omnibus infrastructure bill that's been under construction for most of the year and was passed into law last month with around $500 billion in new spending and even more money on top of that of previously allocated spending. For orphan wells, there is $4.7 billion that have been made available to states, federal land management agencies, and tribes to plug and remediate orphan wells. That section was previously a standalone bill called the Regrow Act, which had been introduced in the Senate by Senators Lujan of New Mexico and Kramer of North Dakota with a variety of bipartisan Senate co-sponsors. And so this version has been being debated among senators, and also at last session House reps, and it was introduced in the Senate in April and included in the infrastructure bill that was passed by the Senate in August, and then signed by the president last month. And so $4.7 billion is a lot, given that orphan wells have not been funded by the federal government for closure before at all. The bulk of the money is set to go to the states, which oversee perhaps 90% of the wells in the country, with other amounts going to the federal land management agencies, primarily the Bureau of Land Management, and to tribes. The money is administered by the Department of Interior, and there are several tranches of funding available to the states. So the first tranche, there's an initial grant of between $5 and $25 million that's designed for states to get going on shovel-ready plugging projects immediately over the next year, with funds flowing in a matter of months. Then there's a large formula grant that's based primarily on the number of documented orphan wells in each state. And I'll get into in a moment how that breakdown works. And then the third tranche of funding is a performance grant that's based on policy reform to try to reduce future orphan well burden, because there's a large set of orphan wells out there right now that are, belong to the public essentially and need to be cleaned up. But there are 1 million active wells in the U.S., and in the absence of policy reform, there are concerns among many stakeholders that a lot of those wells could become orphaned, and we certainly don't want to be back where we started. So there's policy reform that will help this problem, and there are incentive dollars in the bill to help address, and that includes technical plugging regulations to make sure that plug jobs work in perpetuity. There are reforms to financial assurance, idle well management, and well transfer reforms that are eligible for funding, as well as a federal matching program for additional state orphan well plugging expenditures. So to best illustrate how states will be receiving these funds, I thought I'd put a map up of documented orphan wells. Although I just discovered that I actually can't screen share, so never mind.
Oh, Brooke, can you make him the host so he can screen share? Let's see if I can. No, I can't. Brooke will have to do it. See if let's give her a second to see if she gets there. Surely she didn't just put us on record and leave.
Okay, try again.
Okay, great. I see it's going to work. All right. Well, so in order to illustrate how the money will be distributed among the states, I wanted to put up a map of documented orphan wells that the Environmental Defense Fund prepared with Dr. Mary Kang at McGill University this summer and into the fall. We worked with the state oil and gas agencies and collected their data sets on where their orphan wells were located. So here they are, and you can see that there are a few core areas. One is a swath through Appalachia into the Midwest. This is really reflective of historical drilling patterns. The first wells in the country were drilled in the mid-19th century in Pennsylvania and New York. And then the next big concentration is the South Central US, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, into Louisiana. And there's also a fairly large concentration in California, specifically urban Southern California. And then the balance of the wells are kind of scattered around the Rockies and a handful of other places. And so this map represents around 80,000 documented orphan wells. Documented means the state has gone through a process of determining A, that the well actually exists in a physical location somewhere, and B, that there is no responsible party. So there's no solvent owner of record who could plug the well. This is not the entire universe of orphan wells. There are a lot of different types of undocumented orphan wells, which is a term of art. Some of those take the form of wells where the regulator suspects they exist but doesn't know where. Pennsylvania is the poster child for that issue, where the state has estimated there are 200 to maybe 450,000 wells that were drilled before Pennsylvania had oil and gas regulations, which came about in the 1950s. So 100 years of drilling with no records has led to this estimate of a huge number of wells that are out there, but where the state doesn't really know where they are. And Pennsylvania is not the only state that has that problem. Basically, any state that had drilling early on will have some of those wells. Pennsylvania has a lot. Texas likely has a lot as well. And then there are the category of undocumented orphan wells where they probably have no solvent owner of record, but the state has not gone through a process of making that determination. So a lot of long-term idle wells might fall into that category. And so when you add up all those wells, there, it could be a million. And so then this would only be, this 80,000 is only a fraction of it. Nevertheless, here are these 80,000 that we actually know about and that are potentially emit methane, and which is of course a powerful greenhouse gas, along with air toxics that could be problematic for people who live in proximity, as well as threatening groundwater resources. They lower property values, which has impact on property taxes and school funding. And they are problematic for other subsurface uses. So carbon capture and sequestration, even if you want to frack near one of these wells, it's a problem. And so as I said, there's a lot of money flowing, and you can sort of get a sense of where the money will go based on this map. But the key states, or not the key states, because every state is key, but the states that have the largest populations are New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Kansas and Texas, Louisiana, and California are really going to see the bulk of this money, and all of those states will see money in the hundreds of millions of dollars, some in the lower hundreds of millions and some in the higher hundreds of millions. The exact amounts that the states will get, we won't really know that for some time. The initial grants vary in size. The formula grants vary based on the population of wells, but also other factors like job losses and cost to plug. And the incentive grants only come into being if the states actually do the work in order to become eligible. But I wouldn't be surprised if some states are pushing 800 million or more.
Wow.
But with probably an average of for the states that have fewer in the 10 to 50 million range, and the states that have more in the 100 million to 800 million range.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I ask you a bonus question that I did
Sure.
not send over in advance to give you time to prepare for it? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I presume that these kind of dollars are being allocated here because the federal government believes there to be a large environmental impact or social impact associated with orphan wells. So my question to you is, we spend a lot of time at Fellow kind of debating this topic of, if we go out and measure methane emissions, for example, or confirm that there's no groundwater contamination, if there are orphan wells or non-producing wells out there that don't seem to have an environmental or a social impact. Do you guys talk about that? Do you have a stance on whether or not those are still wells we ought to be spending dollars to plug? Or is that too kind of in the weeds and you would rather address the full problem kind of all at once? How do you guys think about, because internally we've even talked about, do we want to plug all wells with private donations? Or do we really need to focus on wells with the greatest impact? Of course, but what about those wells that don't have an impact? And should we still use our funds to plug those wells? What's your kind of thought on that concept?
So most states have some kind of prioritization protocol for determining which wells to plug first. And I suspect that all the money that's been made available could go towards wells that matter.
Okay.
And so, we should live in the world of luxury where we can think about the wells that possibly don't have an impact and then decide what to do or not do about them.
Yeah, yeah.
But I suspect that those wells in a prioritization process would be put lower on the list, and we will run out of money before we run out of wells that are worth plugging.
Right. Good point. And so is there more dollars going to, maybe not more or less, but how do you in this document address that prioritization? Are you guys taking a look at that alongside states and getting yourself comfortable with their prioritization process, or is that sort of theirs to address?
So it's definitely a topic that's been raised in a lot of fora, how are wells being prioritized? And on the one hand, if we're going to be plugging 80,000 wells in 7 or 8 years, you can make the case that prioritization is less essential. How much difference does it make if a well is plugged in year 2 versus year 6? Now that's, if you live next to one of these wells, there's an easy answer to that question. And so there is a reason why states pay most attention to wells that are in close proximity to human habitation. And we have found that around 9 million people live within a mile of one of these wells. So it's not like they're out where nobody is. I mean, first of all, there's people everywhere.
Right.
In Oklahoma and Kentucky, more than 50% of the population lives within a mile of an active well.
Wow.
And so states will prioritize based on immediate human impact. And then, from there, it depends. Each state has a different weighting factor for, environmental risk receptors, and some pay attention to water bodies, and some pay more attention to climate impacts than others. I suspect that DOI is going to be thinking about this, and that states will also be thinking about this issue of prioritization. But all else being equal, you would want to get the ones that are threatening public health the most, and the ones that threaten climate the most, and the ones that threaten traditional environmental resources the most.
Right. And so just to be clear, that's sort of the intent. How it gets managed and facilitated is a little more up to the states, but the intent of the infrastructure bill, and specifically the regrowth piece of that, is to address environmental, social concerns.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
And in fact, there's language in the statute that allows states to focus on historically overburdened communities.
Okay.
And for the federal government to do so as well.
Okay. And so then talking about this sort of pipeline of orphan wells, all these wells that do have an operator now, but we're a little nervous that those operators will kind of continue to go away over the course of time, and it will create this pipeline of new orphan wells. Are there recommendations for reform at the state level that help diminish that pipeline? And can you talk a little bit about what those look like?
Sure. So so we could spend a whole hour on that alone.
I know.
So I would say it's more than an emerging issue because this is not new. This has been wells becoming orphans has been a dynamic that's gone on for 100 years or more in this country. Typically, so there's a few policy tools that regulators have to deal with this issue. So one is financial assurance, which means putting up some amount of money in advance in case of a bankruptcy that would provide the state with the funding to plug the well. And so that could take the form of a bond where the operator pays some kind of premium or a letter of credit, or there's a variety of financial mechanisms that can be used. And many states have fairly low dollar amount requirements for wells, and in particular have a blanket bond mechanism that allows operators to cover multiple wells, sometimes thousands of wells in a state, with one bond, where if you divided the bond amount by the number of wells, you'd only end up with pennies on the dollar to plug. And that's not always a problem. If you have a large solvent operator, then their blanket bond, it's fine. They're going to plug the wells. Exxon's not going bankrupt tomorrow. But that's not true for every operator. And because operators can transfer wells down the value chain to operators with less that are less well capitalized, and all that needs to be done is to comply with lax bonding rules. So if you just need a blanket bond for a few $100,000 to pick up a parcel of 3,000 or 4,000 wells, then you really do run a risk if that operator goes, the transferee goes bankrupt, then you get these big transfers of wells to the state. There's also idle well regulations that are worth thinking about. When wells aren't producing, typically they have to be plugged unless the operator seeks a temporary abandonment permit that allows them to keep the well not closed on grounds basically of future economic utility. But in a lot of states, those provisions can be abused, and operators can use extensions of temporary abandonment in order to avoid plugging liabilities until it's convenient to go bankrupt and exit the scene. And then those wells can become orphans. Right. And so there's room for reform of all of those mechanisms to reduce the possibility of wells becoming orphaned and increase the amount of money available to the regulator to plug wells at the end of life if they become orphan. And there are a lot of people working on exactly what is the right configuration. In each state, it's going to be different, for one thing, because it depends on the makeup of the industry and the history of well development in each state. It varies quite a bit from state to state. Colorado is doing a rulemaking on this right now, which is fairly contentious. Other states are thinking about doing these reforms or are working on it in the background, or in fact have adjusted their bonding requirements in previous years. And with this statute's dollar incentives for doing rulemakings along these lines, we'd hope to see more of that kind of reform coming in the future. And in fact, we'll be pushing for it, because it's one thing to pay for the plugging of these wells that are already a problem. It's another thing to sit idly by and watch more wells become orphans and get on the public rolls. So stay tuned for a whole bunch of policy work coming up in the next few years on this.
Okay, thanks. That's great and really interesting to see how some of these states work. I know from an operator perspective, there's a little bit of a level of fear, that if they update these reforms, I'm going to have to plug a lot more wells, and that's going to be difficult for my bottom line. And so is there conversation ongoing with maybe some of those smaller, further down the value chains operators that have that fear and that may have, you don't want to put all those operators out of business, because then you've automatically created a lot of orphan wells. So what does that balance look like? And how are you guys working with operators to kind of transition into something that's a little more sustainable?
Yeah, so marginal well operators are key to this conversation. They're certainly well represented in the Colorado rulemaking, and you're right. There's finding this sweet spot, because you don't want to create a bunch of new orphan wells with financial assurance requirements that small operators can't afford. And I've heard that for small poorly capitalized operators, getting a full cost bond, which is what a lot of people are calling for, is essentially impossible.
Right.
Because the bonding companies only want to give a bond where they're certain that certain of performance.
Right.
And in many cases, the bond operator could be certain of an orphaning, and so wouldn't do it.
Right.
And so there's no monthly premium that would pay for such a bond. And so there's a happy medium to be found somewhere, or at least if not quite happy, at least a medium.
At least everybody could feel equally happy or unhappy.
Right, and it's likely that there is going to have to be some pooling of industry resources to cover the wells for which it's basically too late for a policy intervention, which I fear could be a lot of them.
Sure. So then this will be my last question, because I know we wanted to keep these rather short, but there's also a heavy component here to job creation. And in the context of regulatory reforms and keeping folks that are running good businesses, how else are you guys hoping that this flow of resources will create more jobs? Are those jobs in oil and gas? Are they in data management? Talk a little bit about maybe what you guys are hoping to see on that end, and how local folks that maybe don't have an association with the state, but are entrepreneurial and do want to create solutions to these problems, how they might be able to get involved.
Sure. So we expect that the funding will create or retain tens of thousands of oil field service jobs across the country. After all, $4.7 billion pays for a lot of plugging. 80,000 wells don't plug themselves. And there are plenty of people out there who know how to do this work and are eager to do it. We would hope that the money goes to, ideally, local plugging outfits in each state, as opposed to, say, large multinational firms vacuuming up huge contracts across the country, because we'd like this money to benefit the communities where these wells exist. Since they're the ones who have been living in the oil patch. Local companies tend to have local expertise. A lot of these wells are old and idiosyncratic, and it's helpful when local knowledge can be applied. There are even opportunities for workforce development on this front. Louisiana is considering workforce development in association with plugging orphan wells to bring in some new players and new community members into this workforce. And so, as the future of energy is tricky, no one really knows, but there is a lot of talk about carbon neutrality by 2050. And in a carbon neutral world, you don't have so many new oil and gas wells. It's not eliminated. But, it'll give the idea, at least one part of the idea of this funding is to the extent that the industry is changing over the next several decades, this is an opportunity for people who have this skill set to do meaningful work and get paid for it.
Right. Okay. Well, very good, Adam. Thank you so much. Again, I hope this was helpful to folks that just want an overview. I know we went into a little detail on a lot of things, and there's a lot more to talk about. Do you have any maybe advice, Adam, as just a last moment thing on folks that want to be involved or think they have something to contribute? I know, like I said, you guys have been great as far as looking for multiple different perspectives. Should people be talking to their states? Should people be talking to you guys? How should that?
I think certainly plugging contractors or people who want to be doing plugging work should reach out to their state oil and gas regulator, because the agencies are all gearing up for this influx of money. In many cases, it'll be 10 or 100 times more than they've spent on orphan wells before. And I should say, we were talking about jobs. States will be hiring oil and gas inspectors because it's important to witness plug jobs more than any other oil field operation. And the states know that.
Yeah.
Until they'll be hiring up to make sure that this work is done correctly, but they're also trying to expand their rosters of plugging contractors that are eligible, eligible to bid on these projects. There is now enough money that you can have some certainty as a corporate entity of work for some number of years. So hopefully long enough for a real planning horizon, which I know has been a problem in the past with these programs. But now is the moment. Reach out to your regulator; they'll be happy to hear from you.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you so very much, not just for this, for all that you've done on this infrastructure bill and continue to do. And again, I would like to encourage everyone not only to check out Fellow, but also just to dive into the conversation, because it's something that we have resources to come up with solutions to now, and we should all be willing to take advantage of it. So thanks again, Adam. We will follow this up with a conversation with Mayor Stensmore on carbon offsets, which is another kind of incentive program, and hope everybody comes back and joins us for that. Bye for
Great.
now.
Thank you, Staci. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.